Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the JPN podcast. Today, we are honored to host Rabbi Sprung for the second installment of our four-part series, in which he'll be discussing the various halachas of the upcoming Yom Tovim as they relate to medical professionals. Special thank you to Turo University for collaborating with us and being such a great working partner, as they always are. Though Rabbi Sprung really needs no introduction for our members, for those who are new to our programming, Rabbi Sprung is the founder and Rosh Beis Medrash of the Beis Medrash Gavoa for Medical Halacha, and is the Rav of Sha'ar Tzedek Medical Center. He's been a longtime advocate for the JPN, serving as a halachic authority for our members. And it's once again our pleasure to host the Rav. And without further ado, Rabbi Sprung.
Thank you very much for their introduction. And really, it's an honor for me to be part of this great effort. Today, we're going to talk about Hilchos Yom Kippurim. We're going to start talking about it. And one of the five prohibitions that we have on Yom Kippurim, the main one is Isur Achila V'Shtia B'Yom Kippurim, the prohibition of eating and drinking during Yom Kippurim. It says in the pasuk in Chumash Vayikra, Tet Zayin Chavtes, V'Hayta Lachem Lechukat Olam B'Chodesh HaShvihi B'Osar L'Chodesh Tanu Es Nafshei Seich. And the Torah says one should afflict himself. And the prohibition is also to do any type of melacha. There's another pasuk that says, what is the punishment to someone that does not afflict himself? He gets a terrible punishment of kore. So we see that this is a very serious prohibition that we have. Eating and drinking. What is eating and drinking in Yom Kippur? Usually we're used to saying, in the Torah, whenever the Torah talks about eating or drinking, so the shiurim is kazayis, kabeitza, revius. That is the eating and drinking that we have usually in the Torah. When it comes to Yom Kippurim, it's different, and we see that the shiur, the amount that a person has to eat in order to be chayiv kores, is the amount of kakoisebe sagasa, like a big date. Halacha Moshe Sinai tells us that this is a different than the rest of shiurei achila. Why? What's the reason? The reason is because the prohibition that we just learned a second ago of eating and drinking on Yom Kippurim is the prohibition that one has to afflict itself. It has to be an opposite that nullifies the person is not in a state of to being afflicted. So therefore, what is Chazal were Mashar? What is the Isur? What is the Shiur? Of Bitul Ha'inui and being Miyashev Daitoi, satisfying a person? They understood that it's a big date. How come a big date? We have people that are big, there are people that are small. The answer is, the rabbis explain, the answer is that a big date, even for a big person, it will do some satisfaction. For a smaller person, it will cause a much bigger satisfaction. So anyways, that's where it comes, this type of shiur of a big date. Therefore, when we talk about chatzi shiur, when we talk about what is akal tchila that we give the people to eat, and we'll talk about it later on, when we give them less than a shiur, the concept is, right, when we talk about, for example, eating is around something like 50 cc. So that less than that would be a amount of eating that is called chatzi shiur. And drinking is we do it meloi lugmav. What is meloi lugmav? It's a halachic concept of someone that fills his mouth on one side, and when he fills up the mouth on one side and he spits out, that is the amount of drink, and that is around, according to a regular person, it's around 40 cc. Anyhow, That is the concept. So we need to have less than that. So we'll talk later on about shiurim. I'll give exactly what are the amounts. But these are full shiurim, that one that eats these amounts is considered that he was mevatel the inui, he is not afflicted. Now, there is a chakira, and I'm not going now, don't be afraid, I'm not going to give you now a shear. I'm just wanting to bring a chakira that was brought by Rabbi Y Sprung just for us to understand better what we're going to talk about. Rabbi Y Sprung asked a question like this: what is really the isur, the prohibition of eating on Yom Kippur? Is it just the prohibition? One side to understand it is eating and drinking. Simply, a person that eats and drinks, that is the prohibition. Or the difference is what? The fact that the person nullified the afflicted, meaning he's not afflicted anymore. If he caused himself not to be afflicted, that is the prohibition. What would be the real difference between these two things? The difference would be, for example, what would be if somebody finds a way to eat with something that does not nullify his being afflicted? Is that usur? Or, for example, if somebody is less afflicted but he does it by not eating. For example, I'm just bringing an example. We'll see later on if that's it. If somebody connects himself to an IV, okay, he takes glucose water or something like that, and he gets energy from that. Is that something? It's not considered eating. No one would say that this is eating. But on the other side, maybe he caused himself to be less afflicted. And in that case, is that mutter or not? There is a halacha chotzi shiur. What is chotzi shiur? Chotzi shiur is, if we literally translate it, it means to say a half an amount. If the full amount that we said before is for eating 50 cc's, or 45, 50 cc's, and for drinking is 40, less than that is considered to be chotzi shiur. So the question is, if one did less than that, he is not going to get the punishment of kares. But what is the prohibition to do that? Is the prohibition to do that an isur from the rabbanon, from the rabbis, or it's an isur deraisa? So that is a machlekes in the Gemara. Lehalacha, we paskin that is a isur chotzi shiur osur mina Torah, and therefore you're not allowed to do it from the Torah. Now, the Rambam says, I'll read the Rambam and translate. The Rambam says, Achalo shata pachot mishiur zeh, one that ate or drank less than this amount, meaning that we just said a few seconds ago, eino chayav karet. This person does not get the punishment of kares. Afal pi shehu asur min Torah bechotzi shiur, even though there is a prohibition from the Torah of chotzi shiur, meaning chotzi doesn't mean literally a half. Here, chotzi shiur means less than the fixed amount that we spoke before. Ein chayavin kares al elo al kashir. The punishment of kares is only on a full shiur. But says the Rambam that one that eats less than a shiur, so he would get a punishment from the rabbis, meaning makat mardut. Now, we know that the ones that are allowed to eat on Yom Kippur, or maybe the better term is the ones that are not allowed to fast on Yom Kippur, are people that are considered to be holiest yesh b'sakona, someone that is sick, that is in danger, and that the eating is going to cause, the fasting, is going to cause his illness to put him in real jeopardy. That is the idea. But interesting enough, we know there is a halacha, the pikuach nefesh doiche kol haTorah kula. On Shabbos, for example, I say that whatever a person is sick, I'm allowed to treat his sickness, whatever is needed for treating his sickness, the pikuach nefesh, I'm allowed to do that. The question is, we know, but for the Gemara in Maseches Yuma, the Gemara says there that when you have a pregnant woman that smelled food, she has a craving, and today we know scientifically that craving for a pregnant woman is dangerous, but the Gemara already says that. So what do? We give her to eat until she comes down with her craving. A sick person that has a craving, so then you have to ask the doctor. That's what the Gemara says. Anyhow, even though that we say that there is a halacha that we give him to eat, but here comes a halacha that we say hakal tchila. The Gemara says if somebody has to eat, we see how much does he have to eat. If we could satisfy him and he won't be in danger if he takes a small amount, meaning less than the isur, so we do that. Okay, that is an interesting chiddush, and I want to explain that, and I'll explain it next year in length, but today I'll only explain the concept. I said it a few times in different lectures. When we say pikuach nefesh doiche kol hatera kula, it means to say, I'll bring an example from Shabbos. There's people that think that Shabbos does not enter a hospital. That's not true. Shabbos is also in the hospital, but when I come and I tell you that there is a situation of pikuach nefesh, and the doctor says there's a situation of pikuach nefesh, the doctor has to do everything to save this person as he would to do on Tuesday, the same way. There's no question about it, but here comes the restriction that he may have. And the restriction is that if he has any way that he doesn't have to use the pikuach nefesh, that is asur for him to do. And therefore, if a doctor has a way, okay, for example, I'll bring an example. If he has a bandage that is already cut, if he has a plaster that is already cut, he doesn't have to go now and use a new plaster and cut that. That is an isur d'oraisa, that is asur. Why should he do that on Shabbos if he has already cut? But if he doesn't have, that is pikuach nefesh and he has to use it. I brought it as a simple example, but if he doesn't, I'll give you an example. For example, writing. Writing is an isur d'oraisa, but if I could write, it's not so pressured now, but it's a pikuach nefesh if I don't write the information, and I could write with my left, that is considered shinui, and I make it to a derabanan, that is again a kal tchila. So the same way in Yom Kippur, if I could do it in a way that the person could, even though he is a sick person, but not every sickness needs eating all the time. And therefore, if he could be satisfied with less food, that is good enough, and that's okay. Now, so therefore, that's where comes the concept of shiurim. And that's very, very important to know. As physicians, or meaning as physician, I'm sure you're going to be asked, and everyone in his community is asked by people, you have to realize one thing. This concept of shiurim, you have to be very careful with it. On one side, you have to know that if a person, you could rely on him, and you use your judgment to rely on him, that you see that he is a person that could really be keep a structure and use shiurim. I'm not going to go into the shiurim. What is shiurim? That will be Be'ez Hashem the next lecture, exactly how to do the shiurim. But I'm just giving a general rule that shiurim is not for every person. There's older people that cannot stick with shiurim, and at the end of the day, if the reason they have to for example, to drink in order not to dehydrate, if you give them shiurim, they won't stick to it, so we didn't gain anything, and that they'll be still in danger. And the same thing in food. I'll give you an example. People that have eating disorders, it's out of the question to talk about any type of shiurim. Whatever we could have them eat, that is definitely a salvation and hatzalah for them. So therefore, you have to realize shiurim is something that if you could do it, good. If not, you could have to give them to eat and drink regular. When and what and all the different cases, that will be in the next lecture. Today, I want to talk about something very interesting. We know the Torah tells us that there is a mitzvah to eat on the Erev Yom Kippur. You don't have it at any other time. There's a mitzvah to eat on Erev Yom Kippur in order for us to fast better on Yom Kippur. It's an interesting mitzvah that is brought. Now, what happens if you have somebody that is sick? And so the poskim talk about the zechoyle has the chiyuv to eat, to take, his medicines or something like that before Yom Kippur in order to enable himself to fast. Otherwise, if he doesn't take his medicine before Yom Kippur, so he won't be able to fast on Yom Kippur, and they'll have to eat or drink on Yom Kippur. Another thing that the rabbis were talking about, the poskim talk about, this is a very interesting topic, and that is it the right thing for a patient to connect himself to a IV, connect himself, meaning obviously to ask the medical staff to connect him to a IV, of liquids in order for him to be able to fast. You have a patient tells you, anyways, I have an open vein. Do you mind, hooking me up to liquids? Is that okay or not? Is that okay? So this is very, very interesting. Or forget about a sick person. What happens if you have a healthy person that wants to do such a thing? So regarding a healthy person, there's a tshuva of Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says, he uses that a healthy person, he talks about someone that is healthy, that takes different types of vitamins, and vitamins that or what's called slow release, or AIV, he says, in order to make the fast easier upon him. He uses a harsh language that is basically taking the Torah and using it for your own benefit. And he says that is something that is not recommended and it's wrong to do. That is when he's talking about a healthy person. Now, Ramosha Feinstein, when he talks about these, and by the way, also Rabbi Ovadia Yosef writes that is a wrong thing to do. Interesting enough is that this tshuva that is brought in the Shulchan Shloima has some background behind it. A grandson of Reb Shlomo Zalman wrote an article in one of the booklets that come out, and he wrote an article. This goes back to Tafshin Nun Hey 1995. Before that, even 93, I think. And he wrote an article, and he wrote there a whole article about using hooking himself to an IV or not, and if it's allowed, if it's not allowed. And there he sent a letter. He got a letter from the Ger Rebbe at the time that asked him, what's the difference between an IV or taking different types of vitamins before Yom Kippur? And on that, Reb Shlomo Zalman used the language that one is not allowed to do such a thing, and he calls him a novel Birshus HaTorah. Anyways, that's just on that. Anyhow, Reb Moshe Feinstein talks about if a person is allowed to do that or not. So Rabbi Feinstein says like this, in Chele Gimel Simen Tzadik, he says, שאין חיוב לקחת תרופה או זריקה שאין ברפואה לאדם. A person does not have any obligation to take any needle or any type of medicine, אלא רק שתועיל לו שיוכל לצום, only something that he will allow him to, will help him to fast. And Ramosha Feinstein uses the language like this. ומשום שהחיוב הנלמד מהפסוק ורפא ירפא. Where does physicians get the power and get the authority to treat people from the Torah, meaning from the what pasuk? From verapă yirapă. The Torah tells you that you have the ability to help and heal other persons. He says, what is the verapă yirapă says? Verapă yirapă tells you that you are allowed to heal. But if it's not for the reason of healing, so why are you doing it? And Rabbi Feinstein uses a very interesting lashon. He wants to say that is considered to be even a chabala. When you go and you do something that is not, meaning you go and you put into the person a IV, as you're going into the vein, he wants to say that is considered to be a chabala. You are basically hurting the person and you're not healing. And not only that, you don't have malpractice, right? Protection. You don't have a protection here. The Torah of verapă yirapă means that if a person came and he tried to heal somebody, and chas v'shalom had some mistake, some accident, so the Torah protects him. That's not our topic today, but you should know in general, the Torah's protection is much greater than the law. So that is that. But if the reason you're doing that is not for healing, just because to make it more comfortable for a person in order for him to, for the fast, Moshe Feinstein says a person doesn't have the right to do that. So again, a person has to do everything in order for him to try to be able to fast. But that's the max that he has to do. Now we'll go and we'll see like this. The Nishmas Avro brings from Reb Shlomo Zalman that a person is not allowed to do that because he says that he could bring a sakana for a person, and therefore he's not allowed to do that. Okay, now, Rabbi Rice, when he spoke about that, a few times we spoke about at different conferences of Yom Kippur. So he said that a person, he spoke regarding a choyle. So he said, can a choyle do that or not? So he says like this. For a choyle to hook himself up to a IV is a midas chasidus. That's a real righteous act. A righteous act is only made for righteous people. When you have a person that usually is not so righteous and he doesn't always look for these type of things, so why would he do it now? And he uses the language yesh b'zeh mishum yuharo. That is an act of arrogancy. And that is not the right way for a person to act mi'ikar hadin. And therefore, if pikuach nefesh allows this person to not to fast, wherever way he is not, that's not the right thing to go and to hook himself up to an IV. So another time in a different year, Reb Asher used language that he said that it would be also a big burden on the medical staff if every second person that has some condition, let's say people that have stone in their kidneys or something like that, that they need to be, not to be dehydrated or something like that. And he said that would be a burden on the medical staff because they'll have to deal on Yom Kippur with these things. And when I'm talking about these things, chas v'shalom, to think that you're allowed to do it on Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur itself, to put in the IV itself, that is an Isur Doraisa, because you're going into the vein and you're taking out blood, and that is an Isur of the Tilas Neshama. We're talking about, the question that we're talking about is doing it before Yom Kippur, and just hooking the bag. And usually when you use an extension to the IV, so you don't have blood that comes out, even though that blood, it's machlekes hapaiskim, it's Isur Doraisa or Isur D'Rabbanan, but it's not a psik ratio. But when you use an extension, so blood doesn't come out, and therefore that is the question. The question is, and then with that I want to conclude before I take questions, if there is if what happens, somebody that is on a shift on Yom Kippur, is that the right thing for him to do? Meaning, let's say he knows that he has a very hard time fasting and he has to, and he's on a shift on Yom Kippur, okay, a resident, a doctor, a nurse, and they know and they ask, are they allowed to do that or not? So the answer to that is, let's see, according to what we saw. If we talk about what Rabbi Asher said before, that this whole thing is a midas chasidus, and he says not to do it because it's yuhara, it's arrogancy. But the reason I'm doing it now is for a serious reason, because I want to be able to fast and to treat people. So I think that is a righteous act, and that every person that is in the medical field definitely is a righteous person, and he's allowed to do that. He's a tzaddik, and definitely you're allowed to do that because you want to be able to fast and to treat people. Chas v'shalom, of course, if a person in the middle treating people and he feels that he's about to collapse, he's allowed to break his fast because of pikuach nefesh. And also, we need you to be here to be able to treat other people. But I'm talking about in general, if a person wants to do that. So according to that, of course, he's allowed to do that. According to all the other reasons that we saw of being a burden on the medical staff, I don't think this is a burden on the medical staff. And also regarding danger, we're talking about people that know how to do it. But again, it's not a chiyuv, it's a heter. And therefore, I think if a medical professional will ask me, I feel that this will help me, if he put himself the needle before Yom Kippur, he's allowed to hook himself up.